Chapter 5. There were six large gray tents, and each one had black letters on it: A, B, C, D, E, or F. The five tents were the campers. The counselor slept in F. Stanley was assigned to D tent. Mr. Pedensky was his counselor. "My name is easy to remember," said Mr. Pedensky as he shook his hand with Stanley just outside the tent. "Three easy words: pen, dance, key." Mr. Stir returned to the office. Mr. Pendensky was younger than Mr. Stir, and not nearly as scary looking. The top of his head was shaved so close it was almost bald, but his face was covered in a thick, curly black beard. His nose was badly sunburned. "Mr. Sturd isn't really so bad," said Mr. Pendensky. "He's just been in a bad mood ever since he's quit smoking. The person you've got to worry about is the warden. There's really only one rule at the Camp Green Lake: don't upset the warden." Stanley nodded, as if he understood. "I want you to know, Stanley, that I respect you," Mr. Pendensky said. "I understand you've made some bad mistakes in your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But everybody made some mistakes. You may have done some bad things, but that doesn't mean you're a bad kid." Stanley nodded. It seemed pointless to try to tell his counselor that he was innocent. He figured out that everybody probably said that. He didn't want Mr. Pendensky to think he was a bad attitude. "I'm going to help you turn your life around," said his counselor, "but you're going to help too. Can I count on your help?" "Yes, sir," Stanley said. Mr. Pendensky said, "Good," and patted Stanley on the back. Two boys, each carrying a shovel, were running across the compound. Mr. Pendensky called to them. "Rex, Allen, I want you to come here and say hello to Stanley. He's the newest member of our team." The boys glanced weirdly at Stanley. They were dripping with sweat, and their faces were so dirty that it took Stanley a moment to notice that one kid was white and the other was black. "What happened to Barf Bag?" asked the black kid. "Luis is in the hospital," said Mr. Pendensky. "He won't be returning." He told the boys to come and shake Stanley's hand and introduce themselves, like gentlemen. "Hi," the white kid grunted. "That's Alan," said Mr. Pendensky. "My name's not Alan," the boy said. "It's Squid. And that's X-Ray." "Hey," said X-Ray. He smiled and shook Stanley's hand. He wore glasses, but they were so dirty Stanley wondered how he could see out of them. Mr. Pendensky told Alan to go to the rec hall and bring the other boys to meet Stanley. Then he led him inside the tent. There were 7 cots, each one less than 2 feet away from one next to it. "Which was Luis's cot?" Mr. Pendensky asked. "Barf Bag slept there," said X-Ray, kicking one of the beds. "All right, Stanley, that'll be yours," said Mr. Pendensky. Stanley looked at the cot and nodded. He wasn't particularly thrilled about sleeping in the same cot as somebody that was named Barf Bag. 7 crates were stacked in 2 piles, and one side of the tent, the open end of the crates, faced outward. Stanley put his backpack, change of clothes, and towels. Squid returned with 4 other boys. The first 3 were introduced by Mr. Pendensky as Josie, Theodore, and Ricky. They called themselves Magnet, Armpit, and Zigzag. "They all have nicknames," explained Mr. Pendensky. "However, I prefer to use the names that their parents gave them, the names that society will recognize them by the time they return to become useful and hard-working members of society." "It ain't just a nickname," X-Ray told Mr. Pendensky. He taped his arm of glasses. "I can see inside you, Mom. You've got a big fat heart." The last boys didn't have a real name, or else he didn't have a nickname. Both Mr. Pendensky and X-Ray called him Zero. Do you know why he's zero? Asked Mr. Pendensky. Because there's nothing inside his head. He smiled and playfully shook Zero's shoulder. Zero said nothing. And that's Mom, a boy said. Mr. Pendensky smiled at him. If it makes you feel better calling me Mom, Theodore, go ahead and call me Mom. He returned to Stanley. If you have more questions, Theodore will help you. You got that, Theodore. I'm depending on you. Theodore spit a thin line of saliva between his teeth, causing some other boys to complain about the need to keeping their home sanitary. You are all once here new, said Mr. Pendensky, and you know how it feels like. I'm counting on every single one of you to help Stanley. Stanley looked at the ground. Mr. Pendensky left the pen, and as soon as he did, the other boys began to file out as well, taking their towels and change of clothes and and taking their water with them. Stanley was relieved to be left alone, but he was so thirsty that he would die if he didn't get something to drink soon. Theodore, he said, going after him, do you know where I can fill my canteen? Theodore whirled and grabbed Stanley by the collar. My name is not Theodore, he said. It's Armpit. He threw Stanley on the ground. Stanley started up at him, terrified. There's a water spigot in the end of the water stall. Thanks, Armpit, said Stanley. He watched as the boy walked away. He couldn't he couldn't for the lifetime figure out why anyone would want to call him Armpit. In a way, it made him feel a little better about having to sleep in a cot that had been used by somebody named Barfbag. Maybe it was a term of respect.